Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. We have a packed show today, and I'm going to jump right in. I saw a story in the Associated Press. They report that there's a growing trend that's kind of interesting to me. It's kids eating dinner at school. According to the AP, the Los Angeles Unified School District is doubling the number of students served dinner, and they're looking toward eventually offering it at every school. Their school board member, one of them, Bennett Kaiser, told the AP when kids are hungry, they don't pay attention. He says this is something that should have started years ago. Now, the LA School District is the nation's second largest, and there are lots of low-income neighborhoods there. And so basically, they're serving supper to 75,000 students, but they plan to expand the program to about 150,000 over the next 2 years. But folks, this is a national program, and with us to discuss this is Rachel Sheffiel. She focuses on welfare, marriage, and family, and also education as policy analyst at, in the DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society at the Heritage Foundation. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me today.
You brought this to my attention because I read the Daily Signal, and you pointed this out. So I went back and researched to see the news stories about this, and it's indeed true that there's a growing trend to serving dinner. In addition to breakfast and lunch, now it's dinner. It's not really a good trend, is it?
No, I mean, this is exactly as you say. We have the school breakfast program, we have school lunch programs, and on top of that, we have a massive welfare system that consists of 80 different types of welfare programs. And so, this is just another expansion of that welfare system. It's another program, being added on top of what is already a huge system.
Well, Rachel, yesterday I brought this up to a guest that I had on. His name is Bradford Wilcox, and we were talking about families and marriage and different things. And he brought to my attention the fact that certainly a lot of people have varying work schedules that would take them perhaps out of the home during dinner and, or in the late afternoon. And so this is one of the reasons why parents like this. And, I saw the point there, and he makes some good points, and you have to think about people's needs. But I don't know. I just think that the idea that the government would provide every meal for a child, it sort of it sticks a knife in the heart of the family in a sense. I mean, it's not encouraging responsible parenting, is it?
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at this as, like I said, another expansion of a means-tested welfare system, I'm assuming that these are, this is geared towards lower-income families. If it's a free dinner program, and the issue really is that for decades now, the way that the government has been fighting poverty is to just create another program to throw more dollars into an ever-growing system rather than really addressing the causes of poverty. One of the greatest driving factors of that is the breakdown of marriage. That's the biggest driver of child poverty today. Children in single-parent homes are more than 5 times as likely to be poor compared to children in married-parent homes. And today, over 40% of children are born outside of marriage. And so that's an area that we need to talk about. That's an area that we really need to address as a nation.
Well, I mean, there are, as you said, other programs, lots of them. For instance, the food stamps. 1/5 of children live in families getting food stamps right now. And some of the other programs that are geared toward families with children. So it seems like, at the very least, we ought to think about letting people take those and use their creativity to provide dinner for the child rather than removing the child from one more meal. Because, as we've seen research, lots of it, that family dinners are very beneficial to children growing up.
Right. They are. There is research out there that talks about the importance of families having meal times together and what that can do, for children's well-being. From protecting them against risk factors. And so, again, we don't want government overstepping its bounds and replacing the role of the family. That's certainly we've seen that with government trying to spread its hand into so many areas where it really shouldn't. And again, this is rather than really addressing the causes of poverty in our nation, we have often just created another program on top of another, food stamps or school lunch and school breakfast. There's 80 different programs that provide cash, food, housing, medical care, and social services. And that system costs $1 trillion roughly and continues to grow. And we need to really get at the root of the problems rather than just continuing to throw resources at the symptoms.
Rachel, this is one of the things I so appreciate about Heritage, and that is that, of course, here on this program, we major a lot on the social issues, and marriage is under attack right now from so many directions. And so what you do there, what I really appreciate is that you marry the two. They're not mutually exclusive issues. As a matter of fact, you deal with the social issues, and a lot of times you get the economic issues right, don't you?
Yeah, they go hand in hand. I mean, you don't have a thriving nation if you have the breakdown of the family. That's where poverty is much more prevalent when the family is not strong, and that's what the data continues to show. Once again, children in single-parent homes are more than 5 times as likely to be poor, and they're also less likely to thrive down the road. Less likely to graduate from high school or go to college, more likely to be involved in delinquent behaviors or go to jail or become single parents themselves. And so, we really need to work on strengthening the family. It's neglected so often in discussions of poverty, and it's a major issue in our nation that we can't just keep ignoring.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. One thing that you pointed out in your piece at Heritage, or the piece, I guess, that was quoting you, was that even better off families are asking to participate in this school dinner program because they say it's going to free up time for sports and homework and things. Really? Really? You can let the government feed your kids so you can have more time to run them around. I think maybe a stop at McDonald's might be more in order.
Yeah, the family it's an important institution. Spending that time together as a family it's crucial for children's well-being, and the research shows that. And so, it's certainly important. Families, they do. There's different schedules and work, of course, that different families have to deal with. But certainly families should be a priority in spending that time together when possible. And I think most families do want to do that, and so finding ways to help them do that, and of course having strong families is one way to give children more time to be have that resource of both a mother and a father.
Sure, I think what progressive government though would rather be the family to the child. That's a discussion for another day. Rachel Sheffiel, Thank you very much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Rachel Sheffiel from Heritage Foundation. We'll be right back.
The Point of View Commentary with Kirby Anderson.
Arizona recently enacted a law that requires students to pass a U.S. citizenship exam in order to graduate from high school. Although it is the first state to require this, many other states like Indiana, Massachusetts, Tennessee, Utah, and Virginia may soon also require this of high school students. Now, under the law, seniors will need to answer 60 of the 100 exam questions correctly in order to graduate from high school. The exam would include questions like, what do we call the first 10 amendments to the Constitution? A few educators have complained about the test. They have reservations about requiring another standardized test. They argue that memorization of political facts will keep teachers from helping students develop a complex understanding of their world. I would argue that we needed such a requirement for some time. Currently, voter turnout is at historic lows. A majority of Americans do not have a rudimentary grasp of government and the policymaking process, and what we've been doing isn't working. All but 10 states require students to take an American government class, but students' knowledge about politics and government is obviously lacking. About 2/3 of the students who took the National Assessment of Education Progress in 2006 and 2010 tested below proficient on the civics portion of the test. A survey last year by the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania found that 1/3 of respondents could not name a single branch of the U.S. government. The same survey found that less than a quarter knew what it takes for Congress to override a presidential veto. It only makes sense that we ask graduating seniors to pass a citizenship test that we require of anyone who wants to become a naturalized citizen of the United States. Sadly, some of our newest citizens in America know more about our history and our government than young people who have lived here all their lives. That is why other states should follow the example set by Arizona. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. I'm Penna Dexter, and as I sit in the host seat this week for Kirby Anderson, I have been trying to sprinkle in some stories about the size and scope of government all week. And, you know, it's disturbing to watch this administration take over so much and want to provide more to the people and sort of redistribute wealth from one sector to another and to dictate how we live our lives. And all of that sort of is at the bottom of progressive thinking. And the more that we get in this country during this administration, the harder it's going to be to unwind it when they're out of office. And so, and what the discussion with Rachel Sheffiel from Heritage Foundation in the last segment, and this whole idea of this provision of school dinners, it was just something that kind of tweaked my thinking. And as you know, many of you know, Kirby and I write these commentaries and voice them. Kirby does one every day. I do one a week. That just shows his production level compared to mine. But mine this week is on the school dinner program, and that's why I wanted to have Rachel on to talk about this whole idea of the schools providing dinner. Yesterday, we sort of looked at the reasons for it, having to do with work schedules, but still, I don't think that the government should be the provider of all the needs of all the people. And I kind of agree with the Heritage Foundation and Rachel Sheffiel that this is just a bridge too far, and that parents, at least if there's only one parent in the home, that parent ought to be the one thinking about the dinner and hopefully eating it with the child as much as possible. And, you know, as we look at these issues surrounding the size and scope of government, and a lot of these issues are economic, but you cannot ever talk about that without bringing in the institution of marriage and its importance to the economy. And it's interesting, I found another story that came from Heritage And it says, according to a Census Bureau report released last week, 20% of American children received food stamps last year. Now, under this administration, food stamps has skyrocketed. But they're going to a lot of families with kids. More than half these children, which is approximately 8.6 million, reside in a single-parent household. So single parenthood certainly contributes to poverty in this country. This report that tells us this information is a stunning reminder, says Heritage Foundation, of the vital role marriage plays in combating child poverty and the expansion of the welfare rolls. Children in single-parent homes are about 6 times as likely to be poor than their peers in married parent households. I mean, you know, we talk about sort of, I don't know, having tolerance, I guess is the word, for all types of lifestyles, all types of living arrangements, but there are repercussions to this, and this is one of them. Today, more than 40% of children are born outside of marriage, and most unwed childbearing occurs to women with a high school education or less, those who are going to struggle most as single parents anyway. So it's difficult to raise a child as a single parent economically. When you only have a high school education or less, it's even harder. A Heritage Foundation says restoring a marriage culture is essential to reducing poverty and enabling American families to pursue self-sufficient livelihoods. And, you know, when I look at something like increasing the child provision of dinners in schools, it's a symptom of an administration, and it's under this Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act, which has already revamped the school lunch program, too. But it's kind of the idea that the government would be the family. I mean, this is something that progressivism has pushed. And, you know, you can go back to the 90s when Hillary Clinton wrote It Takes a Village. And she was talking in every area of society how it takes the whole society to raise the children. There's some truth in that, certainly, but not to the degree that the progressives would like to see, and not to the degree that it's being implemented now. The Heritage Foundation continues, the breakdown of marriage is a leading cause of child poverty. Government spent about $330 billion on welfare benefits for single-parent families in fiscal year 2011. Well, it's gone up since then. And Steve Moore, who is the chief economist at Heritage Foundation, he writes in the Wall Street Journal, and we've had him on many times. He says marriage is the surest economic stimulus. Children in married parent homes are about 80% less likely to be poor. So getting married is one way to ensure that your child grows up not poor. This is the case across education levels. Children in married parent families are also more likely to thrive. They are more likely to graduate from high school, attend and graduate from college, avoid behaviors that would hinder success, such as drug use and early sexual activity. I mean, it only stands to reason, because if you have two parents, you can concentrate a little more. You have a little more time to work with them, to talk with them, to tell them what your values are, to take them to church, to involve them in good organizations in the community. All of those things will help them to avoid some of these bad things in life. Unfortunately, though, says Heritage Foundation, the importance of strengthening marriage is often ignored in discussions surrounding poverty. Well, not at Heritage. They definitely tied the two together. So do some of our other friends like the Family Research Council and other groups. But marriage must be strengthened if we are to transform the culture and decrease welfare dependence. Marriage initiatives that include campaigns to communicate the importance of marriage and also the risks associated with unwed childbearing would be good places to start. And certainly there are lots of ways we could inject into our welfare programs, our provisions for those who are poor in the country, our safety net, requirements for marriage. Instead of discouraging marriage, encouraging marriage. We'd have to rewrite and revamp some things, as Bradford Wilcox mentioned to us today, but that should be one of the chief orders of business. It won't happen under this administration. But as we move into another administration, and hopefully this kind of progressive thinking will be thrown out, we need to move toward that. Would be a positive step to take in our welfare system to begin to encourage marriage. Certainly work requirements are important, and they're helpful in reducing welfare rolls when you have work requirements. And they certainly are just healthier, because I think people just do better in the culture if they're working rather than always just at home getting a welfare check. But that does require childcare sometimes. And so there have to be some creative solutions there. So this is just a very good tie between the institution of marriage and our economic health, and especially the economic well-being of children, that I just wanted to mention under the whole idea that the size and scope of government is just way too big. They're way too powerful, and we need to do something about it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I also, I've got a call on this. Someone's offended by this. Well, I'm going to take that later in the program because we've got to move on to another subject. As we speak, actually, just earlier today, we had a third vote on this idea of funding Homeland Security. The Republicans have supported something that's actually fair, since President Obama announced back in November that he was going to basically legalize 4 million illegal immigrants, that he was going to stop deportation proceedings and allow them to come out and make application for a stay of deportation and to get work permits. And certainly we can talk about that and how it hurts American workers. But that has been announced by the president. It's an executive action. And the House says that's unconstitutional. They've voted to defund the Department of Homeland Security until he changes something in that. The Senate is supposed to be voting on that. They've tried for 3 days. The vote's been blocked. I want you to listen now to Senator Roy Blunt talking about this. They haven't even voted on the bill in the Senate yet because it hasn't been allowed up for a vote, and he makes that point very clearly. Here he is.
So the vote we'll take in a few minutes will not be a vote on how to fund the Department of Homeland Security. It'll be a vote on whether to debate that bill or not. Now, the Democrats, if they vote not to even debate the bill, are clearly not willing to move forward with what it takes to fund the Department of Homeland Security, even though they'll be saying we need to do this in some different way to protect the country. You can't protect the country if you refuse to even debate the bill. Now, the president said 22 different times he couldn't do what he did last year. I understand their lack of interest in trying to come up with a defense of the president saying 22 times he couldn't do something and then do it. The House added ways to deal with that illegal action, according to the president himself, on the bill. But this is not voting on that. This is just a vote to debate the bill. Democracy doesn't work if you don't debate. So often in the last Congress, we were accused of not being ready to end the debate because we weren't allowed to have the debate, but we were seldom accused of not starting the debate. Let's debate the bill, fund the department, but more importantly, look at what the House tried to do to rectify the damage the president did with the way he has moved forward on these issues.
The president certainly did some damage, not only to security of the country, but also just the rule of law. And the Senate will eventually vote on this, we hope. Meanwhile, there are other votes to be taken on border security, and Point of View gives you the opportunity to weigh in on that. If you go to pointofview.net and check out our Take Action segment, you'll be able to send a letter to your representative about immigration reform. Do that right now.
Leadership in the House of Representatives calls it a border security bill. Kenneth Palinkas, who represents Immigration Service personnel, calls it a global joke, writing that it, quote, does nothing to preclude anyone in the world from turning themselves in at the U.S. border and obtaining automatic entry and federal benefits. In other words, he's saying it's a welcome mat and free stuff. Does that sound like border security to you? Point of View developed its Take Action system for issues like this to help make your voice heard by your elected officials. Visit pointofview.net right now and click on the gray Take Action button near the top of the screen. That's the gray Take Action button. We've also got it linked in the middle of the front page under the pictures of today's guests. Kirby Anderson says border security is a serious issue that deserves real solutions. Take action now at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Thank you for taking action to speak up in defense of the nation. Pointofview.net. Take action. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
The topic is immigration, illegal immigration. The news peg is the third vote not to vote, basically, in the United States Senate that took place today. And really the issue is that the conservatives in the Senate are saying they're only going to, and the House are saying they'll only approve funding for Homeland Security, the DHS, if it includes a measure to block the president's executive actions on immigration. And we're going to discuss what those actions were and what the repercussions might be with our next guest. He's Mark Krikorian, and he's a nationally recognized expert on immigration issues. He's been on the program several times. He is executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies. He's been in that position since 1995, and they are an independent, nonpartisan research organization in D.C., and they've provided lots of information to Congress and certainly to the public and various media outlets. And Mark, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, it's good to have you, and I guess I don't know how many times the Senate is going to try to bring up this sort of trade-off, which would be, yes, we'll fund the Department of Homeland Security if you'll do something to modify the executive action by the president regarding immigration reform, and a lot of the president's directives will take place very soon if they don't, correct?
Yeah, one part of the amnesty that he announced in November, which is expanding the amnesty he already did back in 2012 for illegal immigrants who came as kids, that's already started. What hasn't started is the bigger one, which would cover maybe 4 million people, which is for illegal immigrant parents of U.S. citizens. That, they're thinking, is going to start in May, unless it gets shut off.
It's breathtaking when you think of it affecting 4 million people, Mark, and I think that's what has caught the attention of the American public, even some Democrats, but the Senate is just, they're refusing to vote on this, and it's because of public opinion, isn't it?
Well, no, I mean, it's sort of the other way around. It's the Democrats are basically prohibiting, by filibustering, they're prohibiting even a debate about the bill. And so that's why the Republicans are basically trying to make them, sort of out them as covering up for the president and choosing amnesty, an illegal amnesty, mind you, not one that was lawfully passed, but an illegal amnesty over Homeland Security.
And Mark, I think one of the points, and I read this, it was kind of a funny piece that Ann Coulter put out yesterday, but one of the points she makes is just so true, and that is every time you have one of these programs that provides amnesty, and amnesty is a very broad term, it's just forgiveness, really, you encourage more illegal immigration, don't you?
Sure. I mean, last time, when we did an amnesty before, it was in 1986, and it took place over the next, several years, so it's about 25 years ago or so at this point. We, at that time, when the Congress passed the law, we had 5 million illegal aliens, roughly. About 3 million of them got amnesty. Well, so there were 2 million left. And let's say 25 years ago, there were 2 million illegal aliens left. Now we have 12 million illegal aliens. Obviously, it didn't solve anything, and the reason it didn't solve it is because the core bargain, the basic bargain at the center of that bill is the same as what they're talking about, what they were talking about last year, and that is amnesty for the illegals who are already here in exchange for promises to enforce the law in the future. The problem is that those promises are hollow. They, in 1986, it seemed like a good deal. We hadn't done it before. It was worth a try. Well, now we know that they were lying, that the pro-amnesty people weren't telling the truth. And you know what? The person who, just a few years after that amnesty passed, the National Council of La Raza published a long report calling for an end to the ban on hiring illegals, which was the core deal for amnesty, what they traded for amnesty. And now that the amnesty was over, they wanted to take back their concession. And the person who wrote that report now runs immigration policy for the Obama White House. Cecilia Munoz is her name.
Wow.
So they are not telling the truth. That's why enforcement has to not just be passed first or promised, but actually fully implemented before we talk about amnestying people down the road.
I read a little book that your name is on, and it's got two authors. It's an Encounter broadside. It's got you, and then it's got Alex Norris. Yeah, okay, right. You're saying it better than I would. And, I think the big argument in there, one of them, is how much this type of thing would cost us, because there are two sides to that story. There's the side that says, hey, these people are overwhelmingly poor, and we're going, especially with Obamacare and all our giant massive welfare programs, how could we even afford this? Because these people are going to need these benefits. And then the other side says that, okay, they're going to be paying into Social Security, they'll be paying income taxes, and so it'll be actually a net gain economically. So could you just give me your point of view on that? Yeah,
there's just no way that poor people can be a fiscal plus in a modern society. It doesn't mean there's any moral defect or that it's somehow less human than anybody else. It's just a fact, dollars and cents, that people who are going to be using lots of government services because they're poor, they don't earn a lot of money, they don't have a lot of education, those people are going to cost taxpayers money, whether they're immigrants or not. And so there's a rationale for this, for our transfer system, our welfare state, for a shorthand, if we're talking about our own people, the people who are our own countrymen, and we have a mutual responsibility to help them. Now, I want that to be tightened up, run more responsibly, but it's not going away. But the question, of course, is why would we be letting even more people into a modern welfare state who aren't very well educated and through no fault of their own, even if they're working 80 hours a week, can never support their families? It's just not. The Heritage Foundation has done research on all of the government services at all levels of government, all the taxes people pay. And what they found was that a family of four, headed by someone without a high school diploma, gets, on average, more than $30,000 a year from the taxpayer. In other words, more than he pays in taxes. Basically, every year, the taxpayers are buying less educated families a car, in effect. Not an actual car, but the equivalent of a car. Why would it be? How can you make money? How can that be a proposition that works if you keep importing hundreds of thousands or even 1 million more poor people every year from abroad?
I remember back in 2007 when we were debating comprehensive immigration reform, and Heritage was talking about that issue and the idea of the car being provided by the government. They had a campaign that was out there. I think it was on some of the major radio programs about no free Mustang, and at that time it was in like the 20,000s, the low 20s. No free Mustang.
It's a Mercedes at this point, no free Mercedes. I actually looked it up. I forget which model, but there's a model of Mercedes that covers this.
Wow. So, that's a good question to ask, ladies and gentlemen, is should we be providing a low-end Mercedes to illegal immigrant families every year? That's what we'd be doing with the amount of benefits that, on average, would tend to flow to these families. And, it's not that we're not compassionate, but we've got to be realistic. And especially, Mark, as we expand our welfare programs under this administration and make them bigger, that exacerbates the problem, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's what is it now? It's like 20% of the entire population is on food stamps now. And food stamps are one of the big programs that immigrants use. Now, if we didn't have a single immigrant in this country, or if they were all PhDs, we'd still have, real welfare issues that we as a society have to figure out and work out. The point is not that immigrants are somehow imposing on us or that they're the sole problem, but the issue is immigration policy is just a federal program. It's like, farm subsidies or the Small Business Administration. How do we want to run it? How do we need it more or less? Who do we pick? How do we manage this federal program? And that's a decision that has to be made based on what's in the best interests of Americans who are here. And yet, all you hear from the pro-amnesty folks is how we need to satisfy the demands and preferences of foreigners as opposed to the impacts this has on ordinary Americans, especially less educated or unemployed Americans.
There's got to be an outcry from some sectors for this and for all these people, and we're going to ask you about that after the break, Mark, and also what kinds of policies would be good. I mean, a lot of us are saying, let's go with real border security first, and that's what, if you want to read more about that, pointofview.net, ladies and gentlemen. We've got actually an action item on that issue, and we'll talk about that more. I also want to open up the phones at 800-351-1212. If you have a question for Mark Krikorian or a quick comment on illegal immigration and the president's executive action, we'll take those calls, 800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. My guest is Mark Krikorian. He is Executive Director for the Center for Immigration Studies. He's also a contributor to National Review Online, where you can read a lot of his common sense pieces. And Mark, this issue of immigration and what you do with all the illegal immigrants who are here, it cuts across party lines. You've got Republicans divided for the reasons we've spoken of earlier in the program. You've got Democrats divided because some of them are saying all these immigrants are going to hurt our labor force. You've got Christians who are divided because some Christians want to see the rule of law adhered to, and others are thinking, no, we need to be compassionate toward these foreigners. And so it really does cross party lines. But I guess I just want an overall explanation that who is really driving this right now? Who is driving this legalization of right now 4 million illegals?
Well, as you suggested, this isn't really a right-left issue. It's more an up-down issue. It's big business versus small business. It's union bosses versus union members. It's heads of Christian denominations and other religious denominations against the people in the pews in those denominations. And specifically what's driving the president's action he announced last year to unlawfully amnesty up to 4 million people is pressure, in this case, really from the Hispanic organizations and the labor groups, because what they had been trying to do for years now is join in a coalition of both the left and the right, the business groups, the corporate groups, the libertarian organizations, combining with the labor folks and the hard left and the ethnic advocacy groups to get a deal through that would amnesty all the illegals, increase immigration massively, which is what the corporate people want, future legal immigration, double it or more, and then promise, basically as, to dupe the public, promise that they'd enforce the law in the future, which they're not going to do. So they didn't get that through. People basically saw through it, and even though it passed the Senate in 2013, it didn't make it through the House. And so what President Obama decided was that, he's gotten reelected, he's got nothing to lose, and he figures that Congress doesn't have the backbone to stop him, and anyway, he's got enough Democrats in Congress for whom the end justifies the means. They're okay with eroding the rule of law if they achieve their specific political objectives. And so the president decided to go for it and just basically spit in Congress's eye and say, I'm going to amnesty these people, whether you like it or not. I dare you to do anything about it. And that's what the fight this week is, Republicans attempting to do something about it.
Let's take a call. This is from actually an anonymous caller from South Carolina who works in the schools. Would you go ahead?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, and thank you for taking my call. Just to make abundantly the point that you guys are trying to make, and it has been said before, that is puzzling how President Obama is giving away our country. If you read the news for other countries, it's very clear that the United States are not the dominant force and the guardian that it used to be. I know as a fact, and I'm going to give just one example for the sake of time, but I have dozens of them, believe me, beginning with the fact that we provide interpreters for the illegal immigrants in our schools. As Penna said before, of course, it's compassion and care, and they're in the schools, but we need to be realistic. As you also said, it's a lot of money, and I was making a point about the special education. I'm trying to give just as an example. We provide every service that a special education person may need, and all of that is for free. What is that created? That, of course, they call their country of origin, and they said, you need to move to America because everything is for free here. We provide them with breakfast and lunch at the schools. We send them home back every Friday of food. We visit them and provide help with every paperwork they need to fill out. I mean, they really, I visited households where nobody works. They produce up to 10 children, and we support all of them through Medicaid and social services.
Yeah. Listen, thank you, because I think you've summed it all up for us, and we appreciate your calling. You're out there on the ground. Can you just tell me your story a little bit, where you're from?
I am originally from South America. I moved to America for good 10 years ago, and it's interesting that I've been singing this song for 10 years. I've been telling everybody that would listen, because I was never an illegal immigrant, and I resent to be put in the same tag. I've been singing the same song for years, which is the romantic idea that Americans used to have about every illegal immigrant coming here to better their life is no longer reality.
Thank you very much.
30 years ago, they come here because we handle them everything for free.
It's a lot of Democrat vote buying, in a sense. And Mark, what's your comment on our caller?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you hear this from people, on the ground, whether they're teachers, police officers, social workers, people working in, having to train their replacements because foreign workers are brought in. And so when people like the Chamber of Commerce or, politicians say, look, everything's fine, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? That disconnect has created a real trust problem. Nobody believes the politicians and the political elites when they say, look, trust us, we're going to enforce the law from now on, as long as you give us what we want. Now, in the future, we'll be really tough and strict in enforcing the law. Nobody believes them because everybody understands they're lying. And this is, the core problem I think we have is that we have a political class that nobody believes, nobody trusts, and yet you need a political elite to make make changes in politics. And so until the politicians, and this is not, mostly Democrats, but a lot of Republicans are a problem here too, until they earn people's trust, they earn the right to ask for an amnesty by following through on enforcement and keeping their word, they're not, we're going to be in this kind of stalemate indefinitely, I'm afraid.
Mark, I only have about a minute, but what do you think about the idea of having a strong border bill first before doing anything else?
It's not a bad idea, but there's a couple of caveats. One is the border isn't just the border with Mexico. Every airport is a border. Every crossing point, the legal crossing point is part of the border. Every visa office at our consulates abroad is a border because almost half of illegal immigrants came in legally and then just never left. So an immigration security bill is important, I think, as a first step. But a bill itself isn't action. In other words, a lot of these politicians figure, let's pass a bill and we've solved the problem. No, we haven't.
Yeah, we never built the walls and fences we were supposed to build.
Right. Solving the problem is actually solving the problem, not just saying on a piece of paper you're going to do it. We solve the problem, then we can talk about amnesty, which is something I don't like, but I can accept that if it's the last amnesty and we fix the problem first.
Yeah, there are a lot of steps toward doing that. Mark Krikorian, thank you so much for joining me today and providing all of this wisdom and explanation.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to pointofview.net. We've got an action item. We need real border security. It's one step, one important step, but only a step. But you can weigh in with your member of Congress very easily by going to pointofview.net and going to the Take Action button. We'll be right back.
Leadership in the House of Representatives calls it a border security bill. Kenneth Palinkas, who represents Immigration Service personnel, calls it a global joke, writing that it, quote, does nothing to preclude anyone in the world from turning themselves in at the U.S. border and obtaining automatic entry and federal benefits. In other words, he's saying it's a welcome mat and free stuff. Does that sound like border security to you? Point of View developed its Take Action system for issues like this to help make your voice heard by your elected officials. Visit pointofview.net right now and click on the gray Take Action button near the top of the screen. That's the gray Take Action button. We've also got it linked in the middle of the front page under the pictures of today's guests. Kirby Anderson says border security is a serious issue that deserves real solutions. Take action now at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Thank you for taking action to speak up in defense of the nation. Pointofview.net. Take action. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
A broad theme for this week's programming on Point of View has been the size and scope of government, and certainly that includes sort of the overreach of the federal bench. And we've been appalled and certainly reported on state after state in which federal judges are striking down the marriage laws that have passed in states by the people, upholding marriages between one man and one woman. But these judges are just striking it down willy-nilly, and many of the states are just going ahead and implementing the wishes of those judges. And it's certainly become a case of judicial tyranny across the country. And this comes from the Family Research Council, their update last week one day. And they say they're talking about a person who we've had here on the program years ago named Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore. And FRC says, unlike most people in his profession, Chief Justice Roy Moore actually seems to understand the limitations of the bench, and undermining the expressed will of the people is one of them. And it goes on to talk about the fact that another U.S. district judge overturned a marriage amendment in the state of Alabama. This one was passed by 81% of the people of Alabama in 2006. But no, the judge says you have to marry homosexuals. Well, FRC says in a refreshing show of defiance, Moore left no doubt where he stood on the issue. As Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, he insisted, "I will continue to recognize the Alabama Constitution and the will of the people overwhelmingly expressed in the sanctity of marriage amendment." In other words, he's not going to have gay marriages in Alabama. With us to discuss this is Travis Weber. He is with the Family Research Council. He's director of the Center for Religious Liberty there. And Travis, can he do this?
He can, but it's requires a little more nuance and understanding than what most people are willing to do.
Well, that's why I brought you on.
Well, no, exactly, and I want to make this point because the issues in this are so often by the press and the mass media emotionalized, just white to the side of the table when they really require an understanding of our constitutional structure or order and the way the government's set up. So basically what Justice Moore here is doing is he's laying out this idea that it's constitutional and that the supremacy clause of the Constitution says that federal law and the federal Constitution, the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution trump state law when they're in conflict. But it's a very plausible argument. This is what he makes and relies on, the idea that lower federal courts do not necessarily represent the federal view of the law, the federal constitutional law per se, meaning that they automatically trump and bind state courts to the contrary. So what he basically says is, look, Alabama law says one thing. We have federal courts ruling this way, but we don't have a definitive federal ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court that conflicts with our state law, so you are bound to follow state law, speaking to the folks he's addressing, until we receive a ruling or law says to the contrary. And I think him personally, he doesn't know how he's going to approach it at that point, but this is a plausible and reasonable view of the matter. Yeah, it's not one many people want to engage in and focus on in this highly emotionalized debate.
Yes, and Judge Roy Moore certainly has a lot of courage in doing these things. We have posted on our website, ladies and gentlemen, an article by Bob Knight saying no to illicit rulings, and it's a good one on sort of what's happening here with Chief Justice Roy Moore. and some of the logic behind this. And Travis Weber with Family Research Council is with us. You can also click through to Family Research Council. They posted the opinion by Justice Moore, correct, Travis?
Yes, we have links to what he's written in our stories on the matter.
And so can you tell me exactly how did they just go to the Washington Update for last week?
Yes, there is a link in the update, and we reference a letter to the governor on this that he in which he explains the reasoning that I just laid out. He also has directed a memo to probate judges in the state, explaining in a bit more detail that the reasoning and what he's relying on. That I'm not sure if we have links to, but that's something that if folks want it, we can definitely remedy that. But yeah, it's the same reasoning, it's the same arguments that he relies on, and it's important for people to understand this because regardless of this issue or another issue, this gets to an understanding of how our Constitution and structure are meant to work.
Just to remind folks that this is the Chief Justice that had a large Ten Commandments monument installed in the Judicial Building in Montgomery, and a federal judge ordered him to remove it, and he wouldn't, and he was removed from office. But now he's Chief Justice, and he said, this is one of the things he said in his letter, as you know, nothing in the United States Constitution grants the federal government the authority to redefine the institution of marriage. And Travis, one of the problems with these, I know it's going to the Supreme Court, but one of these problems with these states and what's going on across the country is that once a federal judge overturns the marriage law, then most of the states are feeling compelled to start the marriages. And so then, even if the Supreme Court goes the direction we'd like it to go, that you're going to have all these married same-sex couples in these conservative states across the country, and I think that's what Chief Justice Moore is trying to preclude in Alabama. Isn't that part of it?
I would assume so. I think there's several issues here. One is when he's saying that, what he's saying is the state of Alabama is entitled to interpret the U.S. Constitution as it views what it views to be as a proper interpretation. Now, federal courts are coming to the opposite conclusion, but at this point, what he's saying is Alabama is not bound as a matter of law by these lower federal courts. And this is important because when you have folks like him and other people in different positions throughout the states making these arguments, that's significant for the public debate. Their view matters, and it carries credibility when they say, look, this is a proper interpretation of the Constitution. You might have federal judges saying otherwise, but it's important that they credibly, plausibly state their case, so to speak, and lay out their explanation because that affects this matter and how people view same-sex marriage as constitutional or not. A lot of these federal judges have only started ruling this way in the last couple of years, ruling this way meaning declaring a right to same-sex marriage under the Constitution. Once one or two others did, and then they kind of all rolled over and said, well, there's this right. And I've read a lot of these opinions. Frankly, the reasoning is just, absurd, and it's quite, lacking any grounds, any legal precedent, and proper logic as we're trained to use as lawyers. And I think it's just sad to see the judiciary, which is a well-respected and supposed to be a kind of a rock and something that relies on precedent. The federal judiciary on this issue has really just kind of gone off and ruled on this matter. I see it in a rather radical way, I would really say.
If you've got a question or a comment for Travis Weber of Family Research Council on this issue, or really any issues of religious liberty, that's where his expertise lies, give us a call at 800-351-1212. I know there are other folks waiting on immigration and other issues, and we'll try our best to take some of those. But if you want to weigh in on this, 800-351-1212, and we'll be right back with more of Point of View.
The Point of View Commentary with Kirby Anderson.
Arizona recently enacted a law that requires students to pass a U.S. citizenship exam in order to graduate from high school. Although it is the first state to require this, many other states like Indiana, Massachusetts, Tennessee, Utah, and Virginia may soon also require this of high school students. Now, under the law, seniors will need to answer 60 of the 100 exam questions correctly in order to graduate from high school. The exam would include questions like, what do we call the first 10 amendments to the Constitution? A few educators have complained about the test. They have reservations about requiring another standardized test. They argue that memorization of political facts will keep teachers from helping students develop a complex understanding of their world. I would argue that we needed such a requirement for some time. Currently, voter turnout is at historic lows. A majority of Americans do not have a rudimentary grasp of government and the policymaking process, and what we've been doing isn't working. All but 10 states require students to take an American government class, but students' knowledge about politics and government is obviously lacking. About 2/3 of the students who took the National Assessment of Education Progress in 2006 and 2010 tested below proficient on the civics portion of the test. A survey last year by the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania found that 1/3 of respondents could not name a single branch of the U.S. government. The same survey found that less than a quarter knew what it takes for Congress to override a presidential veto. It only makes sense that we ask graduating seniors to pass a citizenship test that we require of anyone who wants to become a naturalized citizen of the United States. Sadly, some of our newest citizens in America know more about our history and our government than young people who have lived here all their lives. That is why other states should follow the example set by Arizona. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. My guest is Travis Weber, and he's director of the Center for Religious Liberty at the Family Research Council. And he's got a great background. He worked in private practice, and also he has handled military-related legal issues. And his degree, his JD, is from Regent University School of Law. And he's also got some training in international law from Georgetown, and he served in the U.S. Navy. He's got an interesting background. And Travis, when you look at the issues that FRC takes on, and I'm so grateful that FRC is standing in the gap on so many issues, especially marriage, but they're beginning to also have this giant religious liberty component, which makes your job very big and very important, doesn't it?
It does. I think religious liberty it captures really anything in which the government is involved and is burdening, suppressing religious practice and expression through law, and that is just it's always captured a lot in the United States, but more and more we're seeing incredible burdens placed on religious believers in a variety of contexts. I think motivated by a view of the secularization of the government at all levels and the apparatus of the government that kind of promotes this view, which excludes and minimizes religious expression in the favor of other interests. But yeah, to answer your question, there are just many areas in which religious liberty is relevant today.
Let's take a call from Andrea, who's calling in from North Carolina. She's got a question on this issue of the protection of marriage. Andrea, thanks for calling in.
Thank you, Penna. I'm confused. 1996, is that the correct date? President Clinton passed the Defense of Marriage Act. Is that correct?
He signed it, yeah.
And my question is why? What was it? Why then? What difference did it make? And then my husband and I voted in 2012 in May, and of course it was in the 66% for traditional marriage. Like there were a few conservative states. North Carolina was one of them, and it didn't really make any difference, or it hasn't made a difference at this point in time. And I just wonder historically, what was the Defense of Marriage Act about to start with? Because now it seems to be a joke, and it doesn't seem to matter. So I'm wanting to understand a little bit about the politics of this whole thing. And of course, I know our president, President Obama, is absolutely been for homosexual marriage. That's just been one of his platform issues. But help me with that, please, if you can.
Yeah, Travis, you could kind of pull it together for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Penna.
Sure. This time frame, the Defense of Marriage Act, I must say that there are folks that have studied this and been around, much more involved at much deeper levels. But I can say a few things about it. And one is that, the reason it was passed and kind of the motivation behind that was a desire to, as a matter of federal law and policy, state that, marriage between a man and a woman is a good thing, and this is, what we want federal law to state on the matter. Overwhelmingly at that time, the country was in favor of marriage between a man and a woman, and solidifying that and defining it to be so. That enabled the passage of that law, and then even obviously members of both parties to support such a policy. Incredibly, we've seen tremendous swings in recent times in the opposite direction. Even President Obama at one point, said that he supported man and woman marriage, and then he switched. And I think a lot of politicians are seizing upon what they perceive to be the changing winds of the public view on this, and they're enslaving themselves to whatever they believe is going to get them elected, as opposed to standing up for the truth about marriage. But let this be a lesson to us. This just shows the power of culture and the public view on a matter. Law follows culture, and this is something that we can still take heart in going forward, in realizing the power of views on marriage and other principles in which Christianity informs a culture, to which, if the culture is enriched by these principles, it will ultimately again affect law in a good way. DOMA at one point was unable to be enacted because of the broad public support. Obviously, that no longer exists.
Well, and then certainly part of DOMA was struck down, and then these federal judges have taken it, I think, too far in striking down the state amendments. But I want to go to another story. It's related, Travis, because this is what happens when you have same-sex marriage. It starts to be a weapon against religious liberty. And it was just reported this week that the Kleins, they were on stage at the Values Voters Summit last year, and I was there, and it was moving because they were telling their story. They had a bakery, they baked wedding cakes, and beautiful, beautiful creations that they did. And they were so involved in the wedding, and, they're Christians, and so weddings are important to them. And, they were really attacked, and their business has been ruined. They're out of business because they declined to bake a same-sex wedding cake because of their strongly held religious beliefs. And this was a judge in the state of Oregon, their civil rights board or whatever, which these things exist all over the country. So just elaborate on that, Travis. This is it's so sad, but they've actually been now, they're going to be fined who knows how much, perhaps as much as $200,000. They'll be bankrupted. They're a young couple with 5 kids.
Yeah, this is a scenario that we're seeing more and more of. There are other cases like this one, and it's a scenario in which, a small business owner does not have anything against people based on their sexual orientation. They're happy to serve gay customers. They just don't want to be forced to be a part of something that violates their conscience. They're objecting to be complicit in a marriage they believe God disapproves of. And, it's important to understand that, because this is often painted as something in which these people are just turning away people at the door, or want a license to discriminate, is a lot of the terminology we're hearing. It's just not true. But yes, this is a case now in which an administrative law judge has ruled they're in violation of state non-discrimination laws on sexual orientation. The case could proceed, depending upon what the clients and their attorneys, how do they want to approach it, could proceed up through the state court system. So they have avenues of relief at this at this point. And ultimately, it's possible from the state Supreme Court to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. We hope that higher courts and possibly the U.S. Supreme Court at some point will definitively rule that the clients' religious freedom and free speech rights are protected in their objection. It's important to note this is a conscience objection. It's not them saying, hey, we just want to be exempt entirely, and we don't want these laws to apply to us. What they're saying is we have a conscience objection here, and that should be honored. So it's possible they face fines and other legal repercussions going forward, but we'll have to wait and see at this point.
I think it's Alliance Defending Freedom that has their case. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Well, and they're working with, I believe, an allied attorney to defend the clients.
Okay, great. Well, it's a moving story. It's just one of many, but this is just such a great young couple, and they're willing to stand for their beliefs, which is good for the rest of us, too. Travis Weber from Family Research Council, just very quickly, back on the Alabama situation. I understand that this is going now to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. Do you know anything about that circuit and whether they could possibly uphold Alabama's marriage law?
So Alabama would, if there is a matter in the 8th Circuit, which I haven't followed that as closely, that it would not cover. It would not cover the state of Alabama.
Oh, it wouldn't?
No. But
okay, Arkansas.
Yes.
And Missouri. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. You guys reported this, and I was like conflating it with the Alabama case. It's actually these attacks have gone all over the conservative South, haven't they?
They have. And a lot of folks, activists, have come in and intentionally challenged these state laws and constitutional amendments, which have been passed with overwhelming support, because many of the people in these southern states support marriage between a man and a woman. And what we've seen is attempts by activists who know that one judge, if they get them on their side, can declare the state law invalid. But as this kind of ties back into Justice Moore's scenario, as we've seen yet, the Supreme Court's yet to rule in the matter, and so Justice Moore is saying, look, lower federal courts do not bind us. There may be persuasive authority. We could look to them. But he's telling his probate judges in administrative capacity, you don't have to follow these lower court opinions. And this is important because this is a division of power the Constitution was set up with in mind. And a lot of people forget it these days. They say, okay, anytime a federal court rules on something, it's automatically we have to follow it. And this is not true.
That's good to know. Hey, Travis, thank you so much for joining me today and for all the good work that you do there at FRC.
Thank you.
You can find out more about this issue. You can see Bob Knight's article on it at pointofview.net. Also, check out our Take Action item on border security. The announcer will tell you more.
Leadership in the House of Representatives calls it a border security bill. Kenneth Palinkas, who represents Immigration Service personnel, calls it a global joke, writing that it, quote, does nothing to preclude anyone in the world from turning themselves in at the U.S. border and obtaining automatic entry and federal benefits. In other words, he's saying it's a welcome mat and free stuff. Does that sound like border security to you? Point of View developed its Take Action system for issues like this to help make your voice heard by your elected officials. Visit pointofview.net right now and click on the gray Take Action button near the top of the screen. That's the gray Take Action button. We've also got it linked in the middle of the front page under the pictures of today's guests. Kirby Anderson says border security is a serious issue that deserves real solutions. Take action now at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Thank you for taking action to speak up in defense of the nation. Pointofview.net. Take action. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
It's kind of interesting as we speak of the encroaching progressivism in the United States of America. And of course, that's coming thanks to the same government that's asking Cuba to open up and get freer in exchange for certain concessions from us. And yet, here's a report coming out of Yahoo News Canadian website. The start of talks on repairing 50 years of broken relations appears to have left President Raul Castro's government focused on winning additional concessions without giving in to U.S. demands for greater freedoms, despite the seeming benefits that warmer ties could have for the country's struggling economy. I guess the question is, are we going to give them what they want without getting what we want? And that's really the question that I'm going to ask our next guest. His name is Sean Noble, and he is president and founder of American Encore, which is an organization dedicated to furthering the ideas of American exceptionalism, free speech, fiscal responsibility, and a return to American greatness. Sean, thank you for joining me. I'm not hearing Sean. Do we have him? Hey, Sean, did you hear my question?
Yeah, I did.
Great. I wasn't hearing you. Go ahead.
Glad to be
first
here.
of all, answer my question. I mean, are we in America, are our negotiators going to give Cuba what it wants without getting what we need?
I worry that that's the case. I think that this is why I thought what Obama did in announcing this redefinition of our posture towards Cuba was a mistake before we had these things in hand. I think he was assuming that he could just wave his magic wand and say, we're going to, change our relations with Cuba and everything's going to be great and they're going to love us for it and they're going to give us everything we want and need. And guess what? This is a communist regime that hasn't changed in 50 years, and so it's no surprise that they have reneged on their deal. We could have seen that coming a mile away, and there is no motivation for the Castros to actually do any of the concessions that the United States would ask for, because they don't benefit from those concessions. They benefit by the current status quo, which is, people can go visit Cuba from other countries. They have trade relations with other countries, but all that has done is enrich the Castro brothers and impoverish the typical Cuban family even more so. And when people say, "Oh, this is 50 years of a failed policy," no, it was never a policy that was unified. We were standing alone in this policy because the rest of the world decided that they would engage with relations with Cuba, and so Cuba has never actually been isolated. If we were actually to truly have an embargo, which included the rest of civilization, or at least the major countries, especially with so little of the old Soviet Union remaining as any semblance, then we could actually force real reforms. But this has been any talk of failure is only because we didn't get other people on board with us, and so I think it's a mistake, because this is not going to fix the problem for the Cuban people.
Apparently, there have been certain changes in Cuba. It's this article that we've posted at pointofview.net and that you guys referred us to, I think. Cuba relaxed its near total control of public information during talks that just took place in Havana. They allowed the live broadcast of news conferences. But, what they need, Sean, is they need our help, because their really, really turtle-paced growth has even slowed down more. And one of their benefactors, Venezuela, has got big problems. Mm-hmm. And so I think they're at least verbally or making a show of sort of wanting to open up to us, correct?
Well, I think they're verbally doing that in the ways that it's typical propaganda, though. I mean, ultimately, they have not done the things that are going to be really important for us. For one, they are harboring terrorists, not just terrorists back from the 1970s and 80s. There's the FALN Puerto Rican terrorists. There's a few of those that are in Cuba hiding and should be extradited to the United States for trial. I mean, there's a variety of bad guys that are down there that Cuba knows is there. They know where they are, and could easily turn them over quickly. And yet, we gave up the folks that they wanted, and we got a couple of our people, but we got the people who are being held prisoner, but we haven't gotten the bad guys to come stand trial and be held into account. And I think that sends that sends the wrong kind of signal, that we would, have these types of discussions and make these kind of promises. I mean, for the president to talk about this in the State of the Union address when we don't have this deal done, I think puts him in a bad position. It makes him look weak to the Cuban people.
Sean Noble is my guest. He's with American Encore. And Sean, one quote says that full normalization will be impossible until Congress lifts the many elements of the trade embargo that aren't affected by Obama's executive action. Can you let me know specifically what his action actually did? I mean, did it do anything for Cuba?
No. It really didn't do anything for
So they're
Cuba.
both symbolic in a sense.
They're symbolic, yeah. I mean, it did some things for, I guess, American tourism in the sense of making it so that people can go there without, the United States threatening to act on that. American Airlines has announced that they're going to do a direct flight to Havana. So there's some things around the edges, but nothing that actually makes a big difference to making Cuba freer. And this is where I disagree with some of my friends on the more libertarian side, Jeff Flake being one of them, Senator Flake from my home state of Arizona. I don't think that just because we have American tourists going to Cuba, that's going to all of a sudden make the Cuban people more likely to be free. I mean, I think that they've had Canadian tourists, they've had Mexican tourists, they've had South American tourists, they've had European tourists, all of which, come with different things in a modern world, and that doesn't seem to have helped the Cuban people. I'm not certain while their Castro regime is in place, how that changes just because Americans now start going there.
Sean, what about religious freedom? Because there are reports that it's worsening in Cuba all the time.
Well, there's just no doubt. I mean, there's obviously a deep heritage of Catholicism in Cuba that has been clamped down on because of the communist regime, and I think as the Castros get older and as they get more desperate, they're going to. This is not a surprise that they are going to try to do more and more to control their people. And I think that this was a mistake for the president to do this right now. I mean, I know that they're putting out pictures of Fidel. I think this might be a weekend at Bernie's, a weekend with Bernie kind of scenario. I don't know if he's still alive, but the point is that they seem to be trying pretty hard to convince everybody that he is. And I think that they understand that even though Raul is the one kind of running things, if Fidel were to die, that would help move, that would give the Cuban people in Cuba some sense of, hey, there could be light at the end of this tunnel.
Interesting. Well, Sean, we'll be watching this as it progresses, if it progresses. And thank you so much for joining us to discuss this.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are also taking your calls at 800-351-1212, and we've had several topics on the table, including the institution of marriage, including our welfare state, and really under kind of the theme, the size and scope of government. And also, certainly, we're directing people to pointofview.net so that you can check out our take action item on border security. We've got votes going on right now about the funding of the Department of Homeland Security. Actually, the votes haven't been going on because the Senate won't vote on it. But we have that. But we also have here at Point of View sort of a step-by-step approach to dealing with the immigration problem. And the very first step is securing the border. And so if you want to go and read more about that and weigh in with your member of Congress, we make it very easy to do that by going to pointofview.net. So I'll leave you there. Also, on our website, there are articles having to do with every guest that we've had today on the program, including one about Cuba. Cuba leaves talks on U.S. ties, and it just sort of updates you on what I just talked about with Sean Noble. And then there's Bob Knight's piece on the courageous act by Chief Justice Roy Moore of Alabama in refusing to implement the same-sex marriages that the court said they had to do down there in Alabama. So you can read about that. And there's much more there on our website at pointofview.net. And certainly we will continue our conversation, taking your calls here in the last segment, 800-351-1212. We want to know what you have to say about these important topics, and especially the idea of do we legalize the illegals? If we do, how do we do it to prevent this amnesty from becoming another amnesty and another amnesty and another amnesty down the road? And, you know, the idea that America needs to assimilate people who want to come and live in this country. We haven't been doing that, and that's why we're where we are. We'll talk about all of this, most of it at least, in the next segment.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I placed up on the website another article since we've been discussing immigration today on the program, and certainly we had Mark Krikorian from the Center for Immigration Studies on the program, but also I put something up about illegal immigrations committing more crimes, and it's an article. It says, let's all listen to the sound of amnesty. If you recall, in 2013, the Obama administration released 36,000 illegal alien criminals into our communities, and they were responsible for nearly 88,000 convictions. So they're committing crimes after they're released. And this article says, including 193 homicide convictions and 426 convictions for sexual assault. So this is part of the danger of really sort of a lax immigration policy. And this new data came through the Senate Judiciary Committee. Chairman Charles Grassley released it. So this is another part of this whole issue, and it's an issue of national security. We are taking your calls on this. Let's go now to the state of California and speak with Sandra. Sandra, thanks for calling in.
Thank you, Penna, and thank you for taking my call. I wanted to make a comment on that lady's anonymous call.
Yeah.
She's from South America. They have been doing this since the 1970s. And Jackson School, between Jackson, Monroe, Arlington, Riverside, California, they were bringing students in that could not speak any English and teaching them with a special bilingual teacher. And I noticed that, and I questioned it quite thoroughly, and I realized they were implementing some new procedures in our school system, which was actually downgrading the school. And I took my children out of public school and put them in a private school because they were going to bust to have a racial balance. That was in the 70s. So I have moved here to near the Arizona border, and in California, we have more than 20 million illegals. It's just outrageous. I am...
Wow, so, okay, some people are saying that we have 12 million in the whole country, but you're saying you have 20 million in California alone.
Oh, I mean, altogether, I just saw some Iranians get off the bus, and I saw some people that they just drive in here from Phoenix, and they have places in here. They're coming from other countries, just unhampered whatsoever, and they're buying property, of course, for free. Now, you ask me how they can do this when they don't have to pay back these business loans. Anyway,
okay, I want to go back to the schools because, okay, you come into the country as an illegal immigrant. You don't speak English, and I think it's important for there to be some ways that kids learn English, but it's this massive inflow of illegal immigrants that's overwhelming the system, correct?
It is absolutely correct. And my mother's family, my dad's family from Louisiana, north of the Cajun country, and my mother's family are from Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. And I have family in here when this was Nueva de España. And we were not allowed to speak French or Spanish. And these people come in, and they get everything.
You mean at home or in the school?
In the school, and they get everything for free. I have never seen anything like it. They just go sign up and get an apartment. They get jobs. You tell me how they're doing it. I've seen them come here, and I was born in California, and under Eisenhower, they would stop us coming back from Calexico or south that way. We'd just be, you know how people used to take Sunday drives and going up to Indio. I graduated from Palm Springs High School, and just on a little Sunday trip, and flashed the light in my face. And of course, I'm more olive than the rest of the family. I'm not Mexican, but I tan up. Everything I do is in the sun, even today, hiking. You know, I'm just one of those people that...
So you had a little trouble getting back in when you take these Sunday trips?
Up in, it would be around the Salton Sea, they would stop us. This is under Eisenhower. This is
when you're already in the country.
Yes, and my dad would have to get out of the car, show his papers, and they would talk to us, you know, and then allow us to go on. Oh, Eisenhower kept this whole country just secure with 1,200 people. North, you know, a few did slip in. You could, like New Orleans, I know where some slipped in there, and San Francisco, you know, some of the people come in like that and visit and then don't go home. And, yes, back in the 50s. And I remember when there weren't 5 Mexican families in Rancho Mirage, Cathedral City, Desert Hot Springs, Palm Springs, because after Korea, we built a house out there. No water, no electricity, no.
All right, I think I just so resonating with you because I grew up in California too, and we would go to Tijuana. We would go shopping. We would eat there, and then we'd come back. But you always were stopped and very much interrogated, and you can bring things in and all that. So I get that. I think I'm more disturbed by the idea that the resources are being spent in the schools. It's hurting the citizens' education and all of that. And I really, it's great to have you call, Sandra, and tell us, the realities.
In the 70s, I saw it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've got to jump in because we're about to end the program. But thank you so much for calling. I really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, so this is just a dose of reality, and it's just kind of difficult to figure out how to deal with this. But I think the way we're doing it is the wrong direction. And I just want to go back to the fact that, first of all, in the U.S. Senate, for 3 days running, the Senate has blocked a vote on this particular. It's sort of an exchange. The House of Representatives wants to say, we need President Obama to back off on his executive order to legalize 4 million people. It'll be happening this spring if nothing's done. And in exchange, of course, we'll vote for the funding for the Department of Homeland Security. The Senate isn't even voting on it, isn't even discussing it, and that's getting some Republican senators upset, including Senator Roy Blunt. And here he is again talking about it.
So the vote we'll take in a few minutes will not be a vote on how to fund the Department of Homeland Security. It'll be a vote on whether to debate that bill or not. Now, the Democrats, if they vote not to even debate the bill, are clearly not willing to move forward with what it takes to fund the Department of Homeland Security, even though they'll be saying we need to do this in some different way to protect the country. You can't protect the country if you refuse to even debate the bill. Now, the president said 22 different times he couldn't do what he did last year. I understand their lack of interest in trying to come up with a defense of the president saying 22 times he couldn't do something and then do it. The House added ways to deal with that illegal action, according to the president himself, on the bill. But this is not voting on that. This is just a vote to debate the bill. A democracy doesn't work if you don't debate. So often in the last Congress, we were accused of not being ready to end the debate because we weren't allowed to have the debate, but we were seldom accused of not starting the debate. Let's debate the bill, fund the department, but more importantly, look at what the House tried to do to rectify the damage the president did with the way he has moved forward on these issues.
Well, the best way to protect our country really is to do something about the inflow. And on our website at pointofview.net, we've got an action item that deals exactly with that. And certainly after the program, the announcer will tell you more about how to weigh in yourself. I want to thank everybody associated with the program today, including Doug. Thanks for running things. Catherine, thank you very much. And Chris, thank you. Tomorrow, Mike Berry and Jeff Mateer from Liberty Institute will be with me. We'll see you tomorrow.
A border security bill. Kenneth Palinkas, who represents Immigration Service personnel, calls it a global joke, writing that it, quote, does nothing to preclude anyone in the world from turning themselves in at the U.S. border and obtaining automatic entry and federal benefits. In other words, he's saying it's a welcome mat and free stuff. Does that sound like border security to you? Point of View developed its Take Action system for issues like this to help make your voice heard by your elected officials. Visit pointofview.net right now and click on the gray Take Action button near the top of the screen. That's the gray Take Action button. We've also got it linked in the middle of the front page under the pictures of today's guests. Kirby Anderson says border security is a serious issue that deserves real solutions. Take action now at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Thank you for taking action to speak up in defense of the nation. Pointofview.net. Take action. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.